They snapped the cuffs on my wrists in my own driveway while my burgers were still smoking on the grill, and my neighbors pretended not to stare from behind their curtains. And for a moment, I let myself look exactly like what they wanted me to be, some washed-up middle-aged guy finally crushed by his HOA, shoulders sagging, eyes wide, hands pinned behind my back, while two officers, with shiny badges, shoved me toward what looked like a real patrol car and yelled about delinquent fines and criminal damage to association property. The air smelled like burnt barbecue and cheap aftershave. But under all of that was something else, that metallic taste I know far too well after 20-plus years in law enforcement, the taste of anger you're forcing yourself to swallow. Because here's the twist that none of them, not even the woman who orchestrated this circus, saw coming. My name is Chief Ethan Cole. I've spent 12 years running the Brookhaven Police Department. I train real officers for a living, and the clowns putting their hands on me in my driveway weren't cops. They were paid actors with costume badges sent by my HOA president, Veronica Aldridge, who had just made the single dumbest move in a long career of bullying people who didn't know their rights. But in that moment, I didn't flash my badge, didn't bark legal codes, didn't pull rank. I glanced back at my daughter, Harper, 16, standing on the porch with tongs still in her hand, eyes shining with tears she refused to let fall, watching her dad get hauled away like a criminal, and I thought, all right, if you want theater, we're going to give you theater all the way to federal court. Because sometimes the only way to end a performance like this is to let the villains finish their act on camera. To understand how we got there, you've got to rewind 6 months to when I moved into Maple Ridge Reserve, one of those postcard-perfect gated communities outside Brookhaven, where the lawns all match and even the mailboxes look like they've had work done. The place my wife, Lena, had circled in real estate magazines with shaking hands while cancer ate her alive one lab result at a time. The house she called our second chance. Even though she never made it through the front door, I bought it with her life insurance. 23 years of marriage compressed into a down payment. Moved in with a closet full of her clothes that still smelled like jasmine and hospital disinfectant, and told myself that maybe, just maybe, a quiet street and a cul-de-sac would give Harper and me somewhere to learn how to breathe again. 3 days into that dream, I woke up in Maple Ridge Reserve and realized I'd accidentally bought into a kingdom ruled by a woman with more power issues than half the criminals I'd put away. Veronica Aldridge, president of the Maple Ridge Residential Council, 50-something, silver hair pulled back so tight it looked painful, white luxury SUV cruising the streets like a patrol unit, vanity plates that basically screamed, in charge, the kind of person who measures self-worth in lumens and property values. Overnight, 3 violation letters appeared like curses on my door. Grass a fraction of an inch too tall. Trash cans visible for 4 minutes past pickup. My mailbox charcoal instead of obsidian black. And while I stood there laughing, thinking somebody was hazing the new cop on the block, the bitter truth was settling over the neighborhood like fog. This wasn't community management. This was rule by fear on printed letterhead. The first time I saw Veronica in action was at a Maple Ridge Residential Council meeting in the clubhouse, where she sat at the head of the table like a judge without a robe, correcting people's tone when they spoke, smirking as I questioned a $500 fine for changing the oil in my own driveway, reminding me in that ice-cold voice that this is not a blue-collar subdivision, while 24 homeowners stared at their shoelaces and pretended not to exist. Afterward, my neighbor, Mrs. Eleanor Park, tiny, polite, the kind of retired teacher who still says dear, leaned in and whispered that Veronica had already forced 2 families into foreclosure over noncompliance, taken their homes over grass and paint colors, flipped the properties with her real estate license, and walked away richer while everyone else got the message. You don't fight Veronica Aldridge if you like sleeping indoors. That should have been the end of it. I should have paid, painted, cut the grass by laser level, and kept my head down. But grief does funny things to a man, especially a man who spends 12 hours a day fighting actual crime, then comes home to find a $300 fine because his porch bulb isn't the HOA-approved wattage. And when Harper showed up that weekend, hair in a messy bun, smelling like vanilla and engine grease, ready to work on the 1968 Camaro Lena had always dreamed of restoring, and we found a notice superglued to the garage demanding I cease automotive activity or pay $5,000. Something inside me shifted from sad to dangerous. I'm trained to notice patterns, It's what keeps good cops alive. And soon I couldn't unsee the strange little patrols that haunted Maple Ridge Reserve at dawn, electric carts outfitted with amber lights, rolling slowly past houses while uniformed compliance officers snapped photos of gutters, cars, children's toys, anything that might be turned into a violation, and another line item on Veronica's spreadsheets. From my kitchen window, with a cup of bad coffee in my hand, I watched those carts crawl like insects. Watched one of Veronica's people lean over Mrs. Park's fence to photograph her late husband's rose garden for a landscape infraction. Watched them linger outside homes of elderly widows and young families already drowning in mortgage payments. And it didn't look like community service. It looked like recon, like the kind of surveillance we train officers to spot when organized crime cases start to heat up. One night, sitting in the garage with Harper, classic rock bouncing off the concrete, she looked at the pile of violation letters and said, as casually as only a teenager can, "Why don't you just arrest her, Dad?" And I laughed, told her I couldn't use my badge to settle HOA beefs. That power doesn't work that way. But the question stuck like a pebble in my shoe. What if what Veronica was doing wasn't just mean or petty, but actually criminal? So I did what I've done my entire adult life. I opened a case file. Only this time the box lived in my garage next to the carb cleaner. I started reading state HOA statutes at 2 in the morning, highlighting limits on fees, noticing how every letter from the Maple Ridge Residential Council tacked on a processing surcharge 3 times higher than the law allowed, how emergency assessments demanded thousands with no bids, no projects, no paper trail except money flowing into accounts, controlled by Veronica. The more I dug, the uglier it got. Veterans fined for flying the wrong size flag. A young couple, Dylan and Kayla Morris, slapped with an $800 penalty because their toddler had drawn chalk rainbows on the sidewalk. Special assessments of $1,500 per house for urgent upgrades nobody ever saw. And then the knock on Mrs. Park's door with a letter telling her that her husband's memorial roses violated visual uniformity, and she could either rip them out or face legal action. That was the night she finally told me who she used to be. Not just a retired schoolteacher, but a former federal financial crimes prosecutor, 30 years in courtrooms carving up fraudsters for breakfast. And suddenly I wasn't just a grieving chief with a bad HOA. I had a partner who knew exactly how to put people like Veronica Aldridge in a jumpsuit. We built a quiet coalition. Me, Mrs. Eleanor Park, my best detective, Lieutenant Jonah Briggs, and later an investigator from the Harrison County District Attorney's Office, combing through bank records, corporate filings, and the Maple Ridge Residential Council bylaws, uncovering forged board election forms, unregistered shell LLCs, emergency assessments that went straight into Veronica's personal accounts. 12 families across 3 suburbs who'd lost their homes under suspiciously similar circumstances. Meanwhile, Veronica was escalating, like bullies always do when they sense control slipping. She started parking her white SUV at the end of my driveway, watching the house, filing bogus complaints to internal affairs about me, abusing authority. Vandalism popped up overnight. Smashed mailboxes, broken sprinklers, trash dumped on driveways, followed by fresh violation notices the next morning citing failure to maintain. When she realized I wasn't folding, she tried bribery, sending one of her board members to float the idea that if I quietly put the house on the market and left, the council might assist with reloca. Tie-in costs, $10,000 to walk away from the last physical piece of my life with Lena, from the garage where Harper and I were clawing our way back to normal one bolt at a time, and I just smiled and told him I'd think about it. While inside, the fuse on something much bigger was burning down. The real turning point came when Harper spread a stack of violation letters across the workbench, chewing her lip like she does when she's focused, and said, "Dad, these codes don't match." She'd compared the rule numbers on the letters to the actual printed covenants we'd requested from the title company, and half the supposed violations referenced regulations that didn't even exist. Entire sections Veronica had invented to justify her shakedowns. That was the moment this stopped being emotional and became clinical. We cataloged every fake rule, tied each one to a bogus fine, layered that over our financial tracing that showed over $200,000 siphoned through Maple Ridge Residential Council into Veronica's network of shell companies, and Fed time started to look not just possible, but probable. We brought in the feds quietly, agents from a regional FBI white-collar task force, people I'd worked with on other fraud cases, and laid out the whole ugly picture. The overbilling, the forged signatures, the impersonation of authority, and then the last piece of the puzzle dropped. Veronica had begun buying realistic police props online, badges, ID cards, duty belts, and in a series of truly insane emails, had written about using the appearance of law enforcement to reinforce compliance. That's when the idea for the sting took shape, ugly and perfect at the same time. We heard through our wiretaps and informants that Veronica was planning a public reckoning for the troublesome chief. She'd hired security professionals to stage an enforcement action at my home. And the plan was simple. Fake cops, fake charges, and a real arrest in front of my kid and the whole neighborhood to break me and scare everyone else back into line. We just decided to let her try. So here we are, back in my driveway on that perfect Saturday, grill smoking, classic rock low on the speaker, Harper talking about college essays, and two men in off-the-rack uniforms walking up like they own the world, reading from a script about criminal misuse of authority and ongoing community violations, snapping plastic cuffs on my wrist like they'd watched half a tutorial on YouTube, neighbors peeking through blinds, phones filming, hearts pounding. I played my part. Confusion, a little fear. There must be some mistake. Glancing at Harper like I'm trying to be strong for her. Letting the anger coil tight in my stomach instead of my voice. Letting them walk me halfway to their fake cruiser because I know what they don't. That behind the hedges, in parked cars up and down the block, are real officers from the Brookhaven Police Department, federal agents from the FBI, and a 70-something retired prosecutor with a phone in her hand, live streaming the climax of an 8-month investigation. The cue was simple. I adjusted my glasses with my shoulder, the signal we'd agreed on, and the world snapped into focus like a movie cut. Lieutenant Jonah Briggs stepped out from behind my neighbor's SUV, badge up, voice booming. Police, nobody move. 2 patrol units rolled in from the corner with lights cold but ready, and an unmarked sedan eased to the curb as Special Agent Marisol Vega from the FBI walked up in jeans and a blazer, holding a folder thick with the kind of paper that ruins lives. Right on time. Veronica Aldridge's pearl-white SUV slid into view. Because of course she wasn't going to miss the show, she climbed out in her tennis whites, lips already curled into that satisfied little half-smile, expecting to see me shoved into a car in front of a crowd, and instead she watched her hired officers get disarmed and cuffed by the real thing, while Agent Vega turned to her and said, calm as Sunday, Veronica Elaine Aldridge, you're under arrest for wire fraud, mail fraud, identity fraud, impersonation of law enforcement processes, and conspiracy to commit racketeering as president of the Maple Ridge Residential Council. The sound that came out of Veronica was somewhere between a laugh and a choke. She tried to pivot, to call it a misunderstanding, a neighborhood dispute, tried to point at me and spin the story, but then I pulled my real badge from my pocket with my cuffed hands, and the whole street went quiet as I said, for the record, I am Chief of Police of Brookhaven, and these men are not law enforcement. They're actors you hired to terrorize your own residents. Phones were everywhere now, neighbors streaming to loved ones, kids filming from porches, Mrs. Eleanor Park narrating like a seasoned anchor as Veronica got her wrists wrapped in real steel, the same kind she'd watched mock officers slap on me minutes before, and for the first time since I moved into Maple Ridge Reserve, I saw something change in the faces around me. Fear melting into anger, then into something like relief. Fast forward 8 months, and the ending is almost too clean for real life. But sometimes justice actually lands where it should. Veronica took a plea rather than face trial on a mountain of evidence. She's serving a long federal sentence, barred from ever touching an HOA board again, ordered to pay hundreds of thousands in restitution. The fake officers and enforcers who helped her got their own charges, some lesser, some not, depending on how deep they were in and how fast they flipped. Every foreclosure she engineered with fake violations and cooked paperwork was unraveled by the courts. 12 families got their homes back or full compensation. The Maple Ridge Residential Council was dissolved and replaced by a transparent, resident-run association with reasonable rules and open books. And in the first election, without even campaigning, Mrs. Eleanor Park was voted president by a landslide. Her rose is now the official emblem on our newsletters. Our neighborhood feels different now. Not perfect. People still argue about parking and noisy dogs. But there's laughter at block parties. Kids draw chalk on the sidewalks for free, flags fly without fines, and when someone new moves into Maple Ridge Reserve and asks, a little nervously, "How's the HOA here?" we can tell them the truth. We went through hell, we fought our way out, and we're never letting ourselves be bullied like that again. As for me and Harper, the garage smells like motor oil and hope again. The Camaro we rebuilt together gleams a deep cherry red, and above the tool bench there's a framed certificate. The Lena Cole Memorial Scholarship for Community Justice, funded from the restitution pool, helping criminal justice students learn how to spot and stop the kind of scams that almost broke this place. The kind of evil my wife would have wanted us to stand up against. So here's what I keep turning over in my head, and what I want to ask you. When someone like Veronica Aldridge wraps greed and control in the language of rules and standards, when they wave fine print and threaten your home, your peace, your family, how far should you go to push back? At what point does keeping your head down stop being keeping the peace and start becoming complicity? And when justice finally comes, is putting the bad actor behind bars enough? Or do we owe it to each other to rebuild something fairer, kinder, and braver in the ruins they leave behind?